Overall, in all of these things, the uber rich do one thing specifically that ensure that they become and remain incredibly wealthy. An investor started his Roth IRA with under $2,000 in it in the year 1999, and he found a way to grow that to an insane $5 billion. That's billion with a B. This is crazy, obviously, but it's crazy for three reasons. First, the growth is incredible and far more than any normal investor can expect. I had to do the math myself on this and figure out what the annual return on that looked like. If my math is correct, this guy averaged an absurd 72.2% return per year. That is nuts. The second reason it's crazy is typically the Roth IRA in particular is inherently limited. Like, we don't see huge account balances because you can only contribute $6,000 per year. Even if you do the math on an investing calculator and you're maxing this thing out every year, getting good returns, you're probably not going to end up with millions or billions of dollars. It's just impossible. The third and craziest part overall is that this money is completely tax-free. And that part of this whole deal is what gets people in an uproar. People are saying this is not right, this is unjust, there should be limitations or restrictions or some kind of backlash inflicted on this guy and other people who are doing this, because it's not okay to have that much money tax-free. Still, other people think that maybe we can learn something from this investor, and if we take careful notes, maybe we can create some of that tax-free wealth for ourselves. Let's talk about it. In this video, we'll get into exactly how people are doing this, why others are freaking out about it, and what normal people like you and I can learn. The fact that this person has $5 billion isn't really the conundrum, it's that it's in a Roth IRA. It's like in Harry Potter when Hermione pulled out that entire campground and library and all that stuff from her handbag. It seems impossible to fit that much stuff in this particular container, but like Hermione, this guy found a way. The reason why it's so crazy in a Roth is that this particular retirement account has really strict limits on how much money can be invested each year, so you can't be making a ton of money and even use a Roth. Like I said before, anyone, including this guy, can only send in a max of $6,000 per year at the time of filming. In terms of billions of dollars, that's like nothing. That's pennies. And whenever you invest into a Roth, you're taxed on that money now. It's taxed the same way as any other income you make, but then once the money is in there, it can grow for the rest of all time completely tax-free. That growth is tax-free. Everything you pull out at retirement, totally tax-free. A Roth IRA is a great option for normal people, even those of us who aren't planning on having billions of dollars, because if you can max that out every year, then by the time you get to retirement age, you might have $1 or $2 million in there. That's factoring in normal stock market returns, not 72% like this guy got, but these are really common accounts, easy to open. You can jump in something like M1 Finance or Vanguard or a ton of others. Just click on the little box to open a new account, select Roth IRA, boom, you're ready to go. In that case, there is a cheeky sign-up link in the description if you want to get started now. All right, so how did this investor do this? Well, the investor's name is Peter Thiel, and way back in 1999, he was involved in a little startup company, a little tech company. As one of the founders of the company, he gave himself a really sweet deal on some shares in the company. Specifically, he sold himself shares for the tune of 1/10 of a penny per share. So way cheaper than anything on the stock market, just like as close to zero as you can get. He bought 1.7 million shares. So he only spent $1,700 for this big initial deposit. He sent that into his Roth IRA, and then the company exploded in value. The company's name is PayPal. PayPal has become one of the most widely known financial service companies in existence, and it has experienced just rapid, crazy growth since the 1990s. At first, whenever I read about this story and I heard about him doing this, I thought that he still had all those PayPal shares and that they were the sole grower of his account, but that's not the case. He actually sold his shares of PayPal when the account was only valued at $28.5 million, like years and years ago. Then he used that money to invest in a bunch of other new companies. One of them that you may have heard of that he invested really early on in was called Facebook. He invested $500,000 with Zuck back in Facebook's early days, so you can only imagine how that helped him create this $5 billion portfolio. And obviously the growth is awesome in whatever form, but he's really smart to have diversified and not just kept it all in PayPal, because he stands to lose a lot less, if any, money on these investments. If something goes down in value, he still has a bunch of other things to prop it up, where if PayPal suddenly lost a bunch of value, he would have been sunk. And hey, if you're going to do the risky thing, to do these like angel investing things with these startups, doing it with tax-free money within a Roth is brilliant, because if it grows, it's tax-free. It's amazing. But not everyone would call what he's done amazing or brilliant. A lot of people have freaked out about this situation in general. Specifically, the article that kind of broke this news to the world was from ProPublica, and they took a lot of objections with this. ProPublica claims that they got a bunch of confidential tax information on a lot of the world's richest people, and that these people's avoidance of tax is not only common, but it's also something something that the general public should be completely outraged about. ProPublica said that basically it's wrong for some people to benefit too much from this kind of account that the government set up with the average American in mind. They didn't set this up with bajillionaires in mind. They thought about you and me. And the authors of the article didn't specifically say what counts as too much. They didn't say $1 billion or X% yield or anything in particular. They just said that we should be upset. And this particular instance was like an on-ramp onto a bigger discussion of this outrage over the richest people not paying very much in taxes in general, that they aren't dutifully contributing to the common good via tax dollars like the rest of us. We're so obedient as tax contributing citizens. And they claim that if they did contribute their fair share of taxes, there's tons of really good stuff that could come from using that money. Odds are the government could use that money to help people who are in need, give them the most basic things of life that they really need help with, instead of another billionaire buying another $27 million mega yacht. And talking about this just begs the question, how do people specifically get these insanely high IRA balances despite the limits on how much you can contribute and the limits on your income? How do they even have access to it in the first place? Well, it turns out individuals can manipulate contribution limits by grossly undervaluing the investments that they buy into. So what they're able to do is say, yes, Mr. and Mrs. IRS, I only invested $1,700 in PayPal in my Roth IRA. I didn't go over any limits. I'm not breaking any rules. The investment itself is uniquely manipulated by them to be sold at this crazy low price, but technically it is sold at the low price. It would be sort of like buying your first car from your grandma. She's super nice. She loves you. She wants you to have this car. She has a car worth $10,000 in the fair market, but because she loves your cute little face so much, she's going to sell it to you for much less. You've only got $3,000 to your name, so she gives you a big fat hug and a kiss and gives you the same car for less money. That's what a lot of these ultra rich people are able to set up whenever they have a really inside connection to the company, because maybe they own it, maybe they helped co-found it, or they have some other really strong connection like you do with your grandma, and they're able to get the price set at basically whatever they want. So, is it logical for us to be mad? Should these people be paying more in taxes? Personally, in response to the ProPublica article itself and the kind of way that they frame this, I don't really like the claims of the authors saying that there isn't a retirement future for most Americans. They say that 1 in 4 working Americans has nothing saved for retirement, which I'm sure is true. I think that's a real statistic. And it describes the IRA as something that emerged from the ruins of the whole pension system, and the pension used to be so commonplace and so helpful that now the American public is just a victim of this overall destruction, that we're condemned to failure and that we'll never retire. Of course, they never entertain the idea of us setting up these accounts for ourselves, or actually saving money and investing money, or doing all that in 5 minutes, which is literally what it takes on M1 Finance. No, we can't entertain the thought of us taking ownership. We have to just be victims and be pissed off because we're playing the comparison game between us and a billionaire. But they are right that most of us can't artificially reduce the price of an investment for our own gain, and then watch as the value of that investment skyrockets and we just sell it for a completely tax-free profit afterwards. You and I kind of don't have any way to do that. Or can we? In learning about this whole situation with Peter Thiel, with the Roth IRA, with the billionaires doing the tax evasion thing and setting these prices really low, I remembered that there is a thing that's out there in the world called employee stock option plans. And it's actually not that uncommon. I've personally never had access to one myself, but it feels like a similar kind of advantage that some people have on their own company. With an employee stock option plan, or ESOP for short, employees are given the ability to buy shares of their own company stock at a fixed price, and often that's less than the current market value price. So at first glance, that sounds a lot like the kind of price manipulation that Thiel and others have done to piss off the ProPublica authors. It's not quite the same because the price that you're offered with an ESOP is fixed, and so there's a chance that the market value of the shares have actually dropped below that fixed price. But even if you do that and you do get to buy shares of the company for under market value, then the difference between that market price and the price that you bought it at is actually counted as income by the IRS. These are called non-statutory stock options, and your employer withholds taxes on that kind of similarly to the way they withhold taxes on the rest of your income. So really, it's not like this special loophole. It's more like an extra paycheck or like a bonus. But that's only one kind of stock option plan. I actually learned that there is another kind of stock option plan that aren't taxed like that. These are called ISOs, or incentive stock options, and these are given to upper management management people or like the big shots who get like the really, really good benefits, these are only taxed at the long-term capital gains tax rate, which is a lot less than ordinary income tax rates. So a lot of people have sort of a version of this, but it's way, way, way less powerful. And that was a stock option rabbit hole that I didn't expect to take today, but now we know how those things work. So what kind of suggestions are being made to actually limit the amount of tax-free money that people can amass? Actual suggestions for improvement are my favorite part of a discussion. Just complaining solves nothing. So we have to make a plan to have any kind of positive change actually happen. Apparently, some of the rich people that were interviewed as part of this article and other articles suggested a cap on the benefit of things like a Roth IRA that then kind of like wears off after a certain level of wealth. As it turns out, that's gone beyond suggestion. It's been proposed by people in Congress and it's gotten shot down in the past. Another suggestion is to set an overall limit on the balance of the account. So something like a Roth IRA, people have thrown out a number like $5 million as a total cap on the account. Then if the money grows more than that, the excess would have to be transferred out of that account and put into a different account. That's totally logical and even is probably really easy to do. As it stands today, these kinds of accounts already have contribution limits, income limits, retirement ages, RMDs, and all these different rules and hoops to jump through. So a kind of limiter or cap could definitely be something that's added in the future. As normal people, what kind of things can we take away from this though? Besides just complaining and saying must be nice or saying, hey, you government, you should change this, what can we do now, like in the short term, to make a positive change for ourselves? Well, outside of founding our own company and giving ourselves sweetheart deals on the stock price, we can actually mimic a little bit of the things that the richest people do. The first is to know enough about what things get taxed a lot and what things don't so that we can make a plan. I'll be the first to admit that learning about how taxes work and devising a plan to try and get around them sounds like just about the most boring way to save money and grow your wealth. I would literally rather go to the dentist and voluntarily get a filling than read the tax code. Thankfully, we can ask for help in the form of an accountant or some other kind of financial professional and ask them for how we can get help with taxes. And I think for most of us normal people, just the thought and the concept of being able to avoid some taxes seems like something that's not really an option to us, but there are ways, and so it helps to understand that there's a possibility and that that door is open to us. The second thing that we can learn is that there are things we can specifically do now that helps us with our taxes. The first is to invest. Capital gains are taxed at a lower rate than most other things, but that only really comes into play whenever you sell and take profits. And I've sold almost nothing that we've invested over the years, so we're not really getting taxed on it and we're not really getting a big tax benefit, but more on that kind of thinking in a minute. The next thing we can do is to use tax advantaged accounts like a 401k and an IRA. With both a 401k and a traditional IRA, you get a tax break today, and so you get to invest this money, have the benefit of being investing and growing your money and growing your wealth and all that, and getting a little bit of a break now this year. And those accounts don't have any kind of income limit. So even if you're making 300, 500K per year, you can still use them. Also, we don't talk about this enough, but there are loopholes and there are workarounds for the Roth IRA income limits. If you want to take advantage of a Roth IRA and all that tax-free growth, but you make more money than the income limits allow, that's fine. There's a backdoor. And literally that's what people call it. They call it a backdoor Roth conversion, even though there's no like official name for it. And here's how you do it. A traditional IRA doesn't have income as a limiting factor at all. So what you do is you send money to your traditional IRA, then as soon as possible, you roll that over to a Roth IRA. The reason this works and is worthwhile is the tax deduction that you would typically have counted on with a traditional IRA happening like now, like I just said, doesn't impact you now that you make so much money. Those deductions just stop applying to people who make a certain amount. So as a high earner, you are never going to get the deduction anyway. That means you're paying taxes now on that money no matter where you put it, at least in terms of a Roth or a traditional IRA. So you may as well do this little switcheroo exercise and stuff it into a Roth IRA through that back door so that you save money on taxes for forever. Whew. I bet I lost some of you guys there in that discussion. I nearly lost myself. Overall, in all of these things, the uber rich do one thing specifically that ensure that they become and remain incredibly wealthy. The thing that they do is they build equity and they don't focus on having so many dollars in the bank. This is one of those big mental shifts that we have to do to work on like wrapping our mind around this whole concept because it's counterintuitive. Even Peter Thiel himself doesn't have $5 billion in the bank. He doesn't look at his like Wells Fargo statement and it goes 5 and then like a bajillion zeros. He has the value of $5 billion as an ownership stake in PayPal, in Facebook, in all these different companies. Equity is the key because despite the urging of the reporters at ProPublica and some socialists out there, your equity is not not subject to taxation. Unless things really change a bunch, it's free from being taxed. This is likely the biggest loophole of them all, for the richest people to build wealth and for you and I to build wealth. You can invest, use tax-advantaged accounts, and build equity that's sheltered from the heavy-handed income taxing that happens with the rest of your money. Income needs to become a dirty word for us, because income rates are the highest possible ways we get taxed. Equity isn't taxed in that way. On the topic of equity, you can also start a business that has actual value. Your equity in that business might be 100% if you're the only person there, if you're the operator, or if you're the sole owner. And so if you build that into something profitable, that equity has a lot of value. And until you sell it, that value remains completely untaxable. Another way we can do this is we can invest in real estate. Then whenever we rent that place out, someone else can build you equity in the form of paying you rent and then paying off that mortgage. And yeah, you might not be clearing $2,000 a month into your checking account that you can go buy cold brew and McLarens with, but they are paying your $1,500 a month mortgage payment, and that's a lot of equity that's in your name that's getting built for you. It's just not cash. I think this whole concept of equity and the fact that it isn't money that we can readily access and spend and have fun with makes it harder for us to grasp. It feels like it's some kind of like imaginary thing that's just on paper. It's just this far-fetched dream to say, oh yeah, I have $100,000 worth of these companies I invest in. I don't have $100,000. I just have the value of $100,000 based on the valuation right at this very moment. I think that's a big mental shift for us, but it can unlock the power of wealth building for normal people like me and you. One negative thing about this whole situation, as I was thinking about Peter Thiel and other people who do this, because I wanted to find a negative thing, I guess, maybe it felt like justice, is just the fact that because it's in a Roth IRA, he can't touch the money without penalty before he's at that federally chosen retirement age. That's just one of the rules of the Roth IRA account. Of course, he's got so much money at this point that the penalty probably doesn't really matter. Like, it's whatever, you've got so much excess. But to me, it would matter. Like, to me, that feels like something that's an actual gatekeeper. For him, most of the money in the account is gains, and so that stands to be hit with a penalty. But for you and I, investing $6,000 a year or however much we put in, we can actually take out that amount we've contributed without penalty. So since for me, the majority of my account is money that I've contributed, it's not gains yet because it just hasn't been in there long enough, I know, hey, if I absolutely need it, I could take that money back out. That's a last resort for me. I really don't want to do that, but I know that I can take out the money I've contributed. It's just the money that my money has made that's locked up behind that penalty. I do think it would be odd to be in Peter Thiel's shoes though, because that is just so much money. Like, that's more money than most people's entire families have ever earned, let alone had tax-free. I learned that he actually moved his Roth IRA within his family trust, and that's named after a Lord of the Rings city called Rivendell. Turns out he's a huge Lord of the Rings nerd, and I'm a little bit of a Lord of the Rings nerd, so if you know the book series, you understand why he would name it Rivendell, but my guess is that he plans to set up generational wealth for multiple generations after him. In any case, that's pretty crazy, and it's interesting to know how people are doing this and how we can actually take some steps to do similar things ourselves and help ourselves out. Not to the scale of them, but it's still really helpful to know. As a special little bonus for anybody here who's made it to the very end of the video, if you've learned something new from watching this, would you do me a favor and leave a comment with the word moth in it, just because it rhymes with the word Roth, and it'll make everyone who doesn't watch till the end like super confused? That would be hilarious to me. So just try and work it into your comment, like, oh, it's no big deal. Like, that guy invests like a moth, or I had a moth sandwich. Doesn't have to be that weird. I just saw a moth. Anything in it that has the word moth, that would make my day. If after watching this you don't have deep hatred penetrating the depths of your heart, then please consider giving the like button a gentle bullish caress, which is just means touching it, because that would help me out a lot. If you're interested in learning more about investing, then go ahead and subscribe to my channel, because this is what I talk about every single week, and I would love for you to be here again. In the meantime, here's a couple other videos that YouTube thinks that you would love to watch next. Thanks for being here. Bye.